Fantastic. Hey everyone. Welcome to episode 46 of Indexer Office Hours. Today is the 18th of January. Today's agenda has been posted in the stage chat in Discord, so please find it there to follow along. If anyone's new to Indexer Office Hours, welcome, and please feel free to participate. We love participation. You can do that either by joining the stage and contributing by voice, or you can ask your questions via text in the stage chat channel. We have some super exciting things planned for today's session, including a fireside chat with Sam Green from 𝗨𝘀𝗲𝗂 𝗟𝗶. So that should be a really good conversation. I'm looking forward to that. But before we get there, we're going to jump into our first regular segment, Repo Watch. And actually, before we do so, I'm tremendously excited to be welcoming Anna to the GraphOps team. She's officially joining us in February, and truly an incredible talent coming to us from Influx Data. And she's got tons of experience running mission-critical distributed applications. So she joined us for the last few Indexer Office Hour sessions. And actually, despite not joining GraphOps for another 2 weeks, she's volunteered to jump straight in and lead the Repo Watch segment. So a huge welcome to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for being such an amazing and welcoming community. I am not good with words, so I'm just going to jump right in. So in terms of Repo Watch, for the major clients, we have Geth, and there we haven't had any new releases. The last release has been version 1.10.15. Then for Aragon, we have a new version 2020-0101, which contains some general fixes as well as a MDBX upgrade. Then we have Open Ethereum, again, new version 3.3.3, and that implements EIP 3607, which rejects transactions from senders with deployed code. I might get this wrong. I don't remember if it's SFGeth or StreamingFastGeth, but for that repo, there's a new version of Polygon, version 0.2.13. And then in terms of the Graph stack releases, so for the Graph node, the last release was 0.25. So there are no new releases, but we have some noteworthy pull requests. So we have pull request 3164, which is currently being worked on, and it disables some GraphQL validations. Then we have pull request 3130, which has been merged. It is parallel receipt fetching, so it enables concurrent receipts fetching with an option to disable it via an environment variable. Then we have pull request 3095, which has been merged, and it adds parallelism into the block stream processing in a graph node. I don't know much more about this, so Ottavio, I hear that you might be the right person to comment on this, if you have any comment on the stream pipelining PR on GraphNode.
So this is, I think the first or one of the first PRs that Felipe, who joined recently, has done, and it should help on performance. But yeah, we're doing some tests here, and yeah, it's mostly for performance.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We have one more pull request 3084 for the graph node. It's some groundwork for store operation pipelining, specifically writable store, and that is still work in progress, so possibly will be coming up soon. Then for indexer service and agents, again, no new releases. The last one was 0.18.6. However, there is a ready to be merged PR done by Chris, and it does batched voucher redemptions. So we have some new features. So automatic batching of query voucher redemptions for controlling voucher batching behavior, plus some other fixes. Then we also have a pull request 350, which is a off-chain workflow issue, and that's a draft PR. It's hard to know whether anyone else is having this specific issue or if it's just being currently worked on and investigated. But that's where we are. I'll hand back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Anna. Excellent job. You did fantastic. I think I was a lot more nervous for my first repo watch.
Thank you.
Yeah, that last PR 350 was from Hope, who's on the call. And I can certainly say that from GraphOps perspective, bringing the off-chain...
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I can't hear you properly, Chris. It's very interrupted.
How's that?
Better.
Sounds fine to me.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. Yeah, so PR 350 was from Hope, and that kind of brings off-chain syncing into the subgraph allocation workflow as a first-class state, and removes the need to do that through the CLI option. So definitely excited to see that merged. I think it will help many indexers. Cool, that covers Repo Watch. Does anyone want to relate any experiences they've had in client upgrades? Did anyone try some of these new node releases and did it go well or not so well? Jim, you said you tried 333 on Open Ethereum, okay?
Yeah, no issues. Smooth upgrade and running as expected on 2 nodes.
Sweet. I don't think, I haven't upgraded our Aragon nodes yet, so I can't comment on that, but perhaps some others have.
Yeah, maybe it's good to note that the Polygon upgrade is related to a hard fork that was yesterday. So if you're running Polygon and you haven't upgraded, you're probably out of sync. As for maybe it's also worth noting that there seems to be some ongoing problems with some versions of the merger software in the Firehose system. So if you're running that, you might really want to check the chat on which version might actually work rather than generate corrupted blocks. And if you have corrupted blocks, there should be a solution posted soon.
Thanks, Cohen. That's really helpful context on the Polygon fork. And yeah, I can confirm issues with the Firehose merger. Even the latest release still has a few issues in it. So yeah, definitely look out at that channel if you run Firehose. Okay, on to Protocol Watch. Juan, you're up.
Hey there, guys. So this week in Protocol Watch, we have a few updates, finally. Regarding the contract side of things, there were some small refactors on the configuration for the deployment of the contracts. It's nothing major, basically nothing that actually impacts the protocol. It's just if you want to deploy the same contracts in a testnet, for example, it will have the updated values for some of the configurations that are currently on the network, and that's about it. Then there's a PR for the contracts regarding GIP 18 and 23, which we will discuss later. But it's basically a ownership transfer of subgraphs, basically. Going into this is kind of like a new section of Protocol Watch. We will be adding or trying to add updates to the core network subgraphs in case like any indexer is using it for, I don't know, dashboards or whatever. There's no new updates since last IOH, where we covered the critical failure that it had like a few weeks ago. But I'll try to update you on any new interfaces or whatever. Going into forum governance, this is the juicy part, I guess. GDR7 and GDR8 were resolved as draw. Both of them, I think, were kind of related to the kind of gray areas that came from the proof of indexing on invalid, or actually not invalid, but failed subgraphs. And the arbitrators suggested to revisit clause 9 of the charter and improve graph node to avoid further disputes like this. I think both disputes are not exactly the same, but they are kind of related to the same issue with proof of indexing on failed subgraphs. So it's good to note. Then there was another small update on the Tendermint support for the graph node. Just basically, Joseph, I think, was answering to one of the last comments. Nothing major, just some small update. And then the important part regarding GIPs that were work in progress so far. GIP 18 and GIP 23 both are related. GIP 23 basically supersedes GIP 18. They are both related to the subgraph ownership transfer. And to sum it up, basically, GIP 23 changes a little bit the implementation of the NFT for subgraphs. So trying to sum it up, it's a very extensive thread, but it mostly just creates a new contract that is an ERC 721 compliant contract, which is separate from GNS. In GIP 18, GNS basically inherited that, but that implementation basically was increasingly complex. The code was way too bloated and also didn't work well with OpenSea, Etherscan, and many other indexers because they kind of like just flag ERC 721 contract as NFTs and they track it if they flagged it on contract creation, but they don't really recognize contracts that are updated to inherit ERC 721. So basically, Ariel had to take that route to implement it properly. But that's about it. There's no new updates on forum research. And yep, that's it for Protocol Watch.
Quick follow-up on the GIP 23. So the inherent proposal, the core proposal has not changed. It's just the design with which we are going about it.
Exactly.
And we have received broad, community support on that. On GIP 18 in the past, it was also initially approved by the council. So question here, maybe would like to get some feedback. How does everyone feel about going through the process of receiving community feedback again? Or would people feel okay going straight to council voting, given that we've had the broad support on GIP 18 already?
Personally, I am okay to move forward with voting, but I will put my hand up and say that's maybe because, I have been watching the changes. So I am kind of aware that GIP in may differ in implementation, but in kind of intention and substance is largely the same thing. But I could understand how other community members who maybe aren't as in touch with the changes, would want some kind of oversight before things go to the council.
Yeah, good point. I might also add that this will be treated as a new GIP. So the quality audits, the peer reviews, and also the technical reviews will be performed on GIP 23 in the same vein. So from a security perspective, we treat this as a new GIP.
I would love to see like a 3-day grace period where people are presented a new idea or a new proposal, and then people are allowed to raise their objections and it not be proceed with council voting.
I'd agree with that. That sounds fair.
Good. I will leave a post accordingly then to what you suggested, 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗄𝗧, in the forum so that people are aware of that. So we have a nice balance then between allowing people to comment, but also proceeding in a timely manner with this. Good. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Oliver. We covered some pretty significant things in Protocol Watch. I feel like the resolution of disputes 7 and 8, is not an insignificant milestone in the ecosystem as we kind of begin to set more precedent. Does anyone have thoughts on that dispute activity?
I guess specifically on that one, it's been an interesting and painful experience, I think, for everyone. A lot of argumenting in public at the start, a lot of confusion, a lot of complaints about lack of guidance. So I think this is the first, like you say, Chris, this is the first step in sort of making the charter work for real. I think one of the things we do need to do, though, is I don't know how we do it, but we need to set some kind of like regular sanity check that the charter reflects any of the new learned outcomes from the GIP process. And I don't know if that's maybe asynchronous and it becomes, part of the arbitration process. And I'm not sure if that's either something we set in stone as the council needs to talk about it every, quarter, or if we make it part of the arbitration process, that there's sort of a tick in the box, this is covered under the charter as it exists today, or the charter requires updating in order to satisfy the new learnings that have come from a new arbitration event.
Yeah, it seems like a worthwhile thing to reflect on structurally.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that if we don't make sure the two are sort of aligned quickly each time we're learning something new, hopefully there's not that much that we have to do, right? But when it does happen, there needs to be something somewhere that sort of triggers a process of updating the charter, because the charter update needs to go through ratification each time, right? So it needs to be approved by it needs to go into review on the forums, and then it needs to go into radical and needs to be ratified then by the council, I think, if a change needs to be made.
I think it has, yeah, but one of my main concerns is like, I guess everyone's concerns is that the process for arbitration, and I think the process, this applies also to the process of updating the charter, kind of like takes enough time that it's way too slow to react rapidly to those, specifically to those grace areas like we saw back in the day with the failed subgraphs, right? So it kind of like generates a few places where some of the indexers thinks that there are some exploits going around, economic exploits, I mean, right? By doing things like deploying failed subgraphs or whatever, and then it becomes like even a bigger snowball, I guess, which I think we all want to avoid as much as possible, right? So I don't know if something can be done to both the process of dispute resolution, which I know that the arbitrators are way too busy. So I get that they might not have enough time to follow every dispute, but try to find a way to maybe, I don't know, add more arbitrators. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just like trying to figure out some ideas, right? But make it so that the processes are a little bit more fast, basically.
Yeah. There's two elements you've mentioned there. So there's the actual amount of time that arbitrators have to spend on arbitration, right? And that's well identified as an issue. And I know Oliver is working in that space with people to bring on more either arbitrators or analysts that feed data into arbitrators as part of the process. So there's something being worked on there that Oliver might comment on in a minute. The other piece is, I'm probably not very popular with some people for saying this, but I think radical as it stands today is a severe friction point for us. In the ideal world, the charter would be, an MD on GitHub right now. Obviously, we're steering away from these centralized services, but right now, we would probably be able to have a slightly more agile process if anybody was able to suggest a PR against the charter, right? And doing that via radical right now, I wouldn't even have a clue how to do it. Maybe developers do, but someone myself who's, developer, tangentially developer, I can figure out how to use GitHub. But doing the same with Radical, seems to be problematic. And in the spirit of agility, we need to find a way to allow people to suggest modifications to the charter, in a more agile way, because at the moment, like you say, we're dependent on the council to ratify, but there's that purgatory that you sit in while the council hasn't got round to ratifying, yet we've already made a decision. We have consensus within the community that this new amendment we want to make, for example, around fatal error subgraphs, indexes are already behaving in the new consensus way, and the charter doesn't yet reflect it. So we either need to look at ways to make it easier to make pull requests in Radical, or find some kind of intermediary solution that we all agree on that allows us to make amendments, pre-approval amendments to the charter.
Fully agree with all of that. And would extend it to the wider governance process that exists within the protocol, such that contributors could make suggestions with respect to the GIP process or GRCs or whatever. But I would definitely agree that as much as Radical aligns with the philosophical values of the graph, pragmatically speaking, it represents a significant barrier to entry.
I look at how other protocols are doing this, and a lot of them are just living their governance lives in GitHub. And obviously, that is a trade-off, but the trade-off that they're making is around decentralization, and they're handing that over, cashing that in for agility at this point in time. So, I know that dog fooding is a big deal around here, and it is important, and I'm all for it, but we also need to be practical, and we need to be able to manage our protocol and the charters around the protocol efficiently. Otherwise, you'll have me and some other indexer, throwing mud at each other in public, which is what happened last time. That wouldn't happen if we had a more agile process to manage the charter. Oliver, do you want to speak at all on the arbitration piece? I don't know if that's anything you're able to talk about at this point.
Yeah, I can sort of pre-announce that it's something we're working on, so it's not official as such, but we have currently an arbitration team consisting of Ariel, Ord, and it's Yanis, right? And they have, as we've seen in the last year, incredibly, a lot of stuff on their plate as is already. There is a legwork type of process, an analysis that has to be performed that is very time intensive before you can arrive at a decision. So what we're looking at doing right now is to identify, one, maybe even more community members that are qualified performing this type of analysis that can then be presented to the arbitration team for interpretation and decision making, which would really take a lot of the time away from the arbitration team itself and would help speed things along to arrive at faster decisions. So that's something that we're looking at right now.
Thanks for sharing, Oliver. Okay, well, yeah, I thought there were some really good points made there. I wonder what the right kind of follow-up actions are on some of the things you were talking about, Jim. Seems important.
I think maybe the agility question really needs to go to the council. So via Oliver, maybe I can bring this, assuming this is not just my concern, you've shared your concern too, Chris. Juan shared his concerns. We have three indexer related or indexer voices that are concerned about this. I would hope that more indexers are also concerned. If we get a few more people agreeing that this needs to be pursued, we need to be more agile in the chat here, then I'll ask Oliver to add this to the agenda for the next council meeting, and maybe we can raise the awareness at that level and then see how we might fix it.
Awesome. That sounds great. I wonder whether it might be helpful as a kind of signal to the council, if maybe some indexers get together and sign in some respect a kind of statement of concern, or really just, you know, kind of asserting that they agree with the perspective that this needs to be considered?
I think if people want to DM me and just give a +1, that's fine. And then when I go to bring this up at the council, I'll have a list of names. The assumption would be if you see this as a concern, then you're also interested in finding the solution. If the council acknowledges the problem, then that would probably what we would do. We would organize that group of people to have a discussion about how we might fix this.
I've just posted a quick line in the stage chat, especially for all the indexers. Put your thumbs up if you agree with the suggestion that Jim just made, and then Jim can also track who put the thumbs up in there.
Awesome. Thank you both. Okay, onward. And next up, we have a really exciting segment, a fireside chat with Sam Green from Semiotic AI. And I see we're lucky enough to have Alexi, Kai, and Sam here today. Thank you all for joining us, and yeah, thanks for joining us to chat, Sam.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Loud and clear. I'll just say a few quick words. So Semiotic was recently awarded a core developer grant by the Graph Foundation. I'll drop a link to that in the stage chat in a second. So first of all, huge congratulations to Semiotic AI for that. And welcome to the ecosystem in this more formal capacity. So Semiotic's team really has an incredible background. I'm sure anybody who's listened to GRT IQ number 43, where Sam was recently interviewed, you know, just the depth of expertise in things like agent-based systems and reinforcement learning, cryptography, and encryption is quite incredible. So we're really lucky to have this pedigree of talent in the ecosystem. It's worth saying Semiotic's also an indexer on the decentralized network, so they participate on that level as well. And yeah, let's kind of jump into it, Sam. So would you mind kind of giving us a whirlwind tour of your background and experience before you started Semiotic?
You bet. I did an undergrad in computer science, and then I fell in love with math during that time and went and got a master's degree in applied math. And after that, I did embedded development for a bit before going to Sandia National Labs, which is one of the Department of Energy's, it's a Department of Energy research lab, and they actually focus on, their specialty is, they're the engineering lab for nuclear weapons. And there I was in a team for 5 years where I did cryptography, so I was in the cryptography department. And why do we care about cryptography, or why did that lab care about cryptography? Well, cryptography is used to secure nuclear weapons. And what we did was we specialized in basically breaking cryptographic hardware systems and analyzing them for weaknesses so that we could build better cryptography systems. During that time, we would go to conferences, and I met the founder of the world's largest cryptographic hardware conference. His name is 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀, and he invited me to come work on a PhD with him, and I did. I went to UC Santa Barbara and did that. And during that time, I made a pivot into AI. That pivot was kind of natural for me because a lot of my cryptographic assessment work involved a lot of data and a lot of statistics. And I started using a lot of machine learning during that time. So it was kind of natural to pivot into that area, which was it was an exploding area back in 2015. And it was a good topic to focus on. And during that time, I met Ahmet and Alexi. They were at IBM Research, and we really kind of hit it off, and we kept trying to work together. We were going to the same conferences and talking frequently. And then right at the time I finished my PhD, Ahmet had decided that he was going to start a company. And he asked me if I'd be interested in joining him on that adventure, and I was. And that was February of we kicked it off February of 2020. So it's been about 2 years now.
Incredible. It's quite a ride, and something that's kind of fascinating to me is how many people that have landed up in the graph ecosystem have some background in electrical engineering and embedded systems. You know, I'm thinking yourself, even Jim here, Yaniv, Brandon, Gokai as well. Do you think that's something about electrical engineering that has parallels with data processing and some of the challenges that we're solving in the graph ecosystem?
Yeah, I do. You know, at a high level, if we look at the EVM, I view the EVM as basically it's a resource constrained system, and you see that a lot of the tricks used to write efficient EVM code there are a lot of parallels in writing efficient code for embedded systems. For example, you know, we only have integer arithmetic in the EVM, and that's actually still true if you look at the weakest embedded systems. They don't have floating point units, so you have to use these integer tricks. And so really what's happening is that a lot of the math tricks are being pulled from the old techniques for embedded development. And then I think similarly for the cryptography side of things, cryptography was often very mathematically intensive work, and this forced us to go to hardware accelerators. And so what ends up happening is that if you have a background in especially cryptographic engineering, meaning implementing cryptography for commercial systems, you often have experience in resource constrained devices. And, you know, all this background in having all this cryptographic hardware experience is useful now when we come to the graph, especially as we start working on the zero knowledge proof efforts. We're still thinking about efficiency. We're still thinking about security. It's basically the same problems that we've been working on for a long time, just in a new context.
Thank you for that answer. That was really, really insightful. And I wonder whether you're secretly a musician as well, because that's another theme that pops up a lot.
No, I'm not actually. I don't think we have Severiano Cisneros. He's our musician. He's a cryptographer on the team. I think he's the only one, unless Kai is also a musician. I didn't know about it yet.
Cool. So I guess if you were to look back at the last 12 months and semiotics work within the ecosystem that has really led you up to this point of joining as a core developer, you know, how would you summarize that activity? Who were the main teams that you worked with to deliver that work?
So a year ago, we were still a Web 2 company. We had received some money from the government, from the NSF, to pursue some efficient cryptography work that we were doing. But we were thinking about, okay, we haven't been getting traction with our target market, and we need to pivot. And at that exact same time, Jackson Blazinski, who's a cryptographer at Edgenode, he came to us and he said that Brandon Ramirez was thinking about interested in using reinforcement learning to test ideas proposed changes in the graph, basically reinforcement learning agents to exercise and learn how to interact in the graph to see if there are where the strengths and weaknesses are. So we talked with Brandon just at a high level and to understand the sorts of problems that he wanted to work on, and it was clear to me that it was a good fit. I had just finished my PhD a year before that. My PhD was in reinforcement learning. So we had a great conversation and it was a clear fit. And so we applied. This was during Wave 1 grants from the Graph Foundation. And we applied for this RL project. And just to kind of to tell everybody here, just to give it some more context, when we applied, we were very ambitious with the application. It was great that we got some good feedback from the Graph and the Graph Foundation, and we were able to understand that the complexity of building in this space. There are a lot of moving parts, and we were new to Web3 at that time, and so we were able to get a grant to just basically get started and go after some lower hanging fruit. And we did some simple reinforcement learning experiments. Basically, we experimented with using RL to help consumers dynamically select prices for their queries. This isn't currently done in the protocol, but we showed that if dApps wanted to, they could dynamically adjust their prices and figure out basically whether they were trying to prioritize for how much they spent, or if they needed to prioritize latency, that we could use agents. We could provide dApp developers basically agents that would automatically select these prices. This isn't how we typically, well, this isn't how we're using the protocol as a community right now. So we did these early experiments and we saw more and more opportunities for RL. And then what happened was about halfway through last year, I flew out. Halfway through last year, I traveled to Austin to meet with Zach, just because I prefer in face-to-face whenever I can. And we had some budget for travel from our government funding, so I used it. And he said, "Hey, I'm happy with what you guys are doing with RL, and I'm curious if you'd like to also do some zero knowledge proof work." And prior to pivoting, we were actually a cryptography company. We were focused on homomorphic encryption. So our team has a lot of cryptography background, as everybody knows at this point. And we were excited to jump into the ZKP space. The ZKP space uses the same tools of cryptography that our team has been practicing for many years. So it was new algorithms that were built on top of existing cryptographic, what we call primitives or building blocks. So we were able to jump in and start contributing with that space. And then if we fast forward to the end of last year, we've identified basically many areas where we could contribute, both on the reinforcement learning and other traditional AI methods, and where we can contribute with cryptography. And we basically, for the context, we see that, okay, there are these, we see that there are, we see that the core dev teams are being included into the Graph by the Graph Foundation, and we said, hey, let's give it a shot. We know we can contribute in the space, and we believe the space is the future, and let's become a part of this long term. And so we basically, I think, we basically went for it, and it worked out great. And here we are, and we're excited for the years ahead.
Absolutely. Quite a journey we're all on. So Semiotic is our first core dev team that is focused entirely on research and development. And I'm wondering whether you can tell us how that's different to some of the other core dev teams.
Yeah, so the other core dev teams are, so at a high level, the way I like to think about R&D, and I was introduced to this way of thinking about it at Sandia Labs. And when you think of R&D, you could think of big R and little d, or little r and big D. And that means, is there more of a focus on research or more of a focus on development? And different organizations and different groups may have a different focus. So I actually think that all of the teams, everybody here, especially considering how new this space is, all of us are doing R&D to some extent. All of the organizations on this call and in all the core dev teams, everybody involved with the graph is involved in R&D at different to different extents. And I would say that the previous core dev teams that were added were probably little r and big D. It is more clear what the immediate technical deliverables are and what the timelines of getting those out are, and probably in terms of what needs to be done is more clear. And that what that means is that there's going to be a lot of engineering work needed to deliver on these projects. If you're talking about big R, little d, which is what Semiotic currently is, we still have these timelines of deliverables, but a lot of times it's not clear what needs to be done yet in order to achieve these timelines and deliverables. Maybe, for example, I'll give you two examples. One is I'll use the zero knowledge proof. I'll just focus on the zero knowledge proof right now because that's at the top of my mind. So we're currently building a new system for verifiable micropayments. Internally it's called Roadrunner, and Roadrunner has a lot of moving parts that are mathematical. So these zero knowledge proofs. If you look at the papers, basically it says, assume you have some capability, some sort of mathematical capability. If you do, then you can build these zero knowledge proof systems. Well, like in all things, the devil's in the details. And if you start trying to actually implement these papers, you'll see, oh, I actually don't have some sort of mathematical capability that this paper assumes. Now, if I want to build a system based on this paper, I need to obtain some sort of math capability that this paper's assuming. And in addition, there are all the other constraints that we have, like it needs to be fast enough. It needs to have a small data footprint. This is all assuming that this was going to be interacting with the EVM. And so we spend a lot of time, for example, thinking about new mathematical primitives that we could then build a functioning system on. Once we have these mathematical primitives, then we pivot into a development phase where we have all the building blocks, all the math is known. Now we have to, actually build and deploy the working system. So yeah, hopefully that gives some context into what it means to be a research focused core dev team.
Absolutely, and I love that answer around big R, small d. I think that captures it really well, and fully agree that things are so early. There's the opportunity for really all stakeholders at this kind of time to participate in the research and protocol design components, and that's certainly one of the things that attracted me to the space. And the opportunity to be around so many smart people and to be at the intersection of so many of these deep technical domains, and the opportunity to have real impact. So fully agree there. And I'll also say that your answer made me think of your discussion with 𝗨𝗀𝗃𝗃 and specifically about the difference between math and applied math. And yeah, it's great to see that we're building systems, not just in theory but in the real world.
Yeah, that's those are two different problems, right? Theory is one set of skills. Academics typically excel at that, and then when you build systems in the real world, it requires a lot more people, often totally different approach.
Absolutely.
I have a follow-up question on that. So, talking the 𝗨𝗃𝗃𝗃 podcast about AT&T and how their core path of the business has actually created so many unexpected innovations along the way, and that the graph has that same potential. I'm curious, just like going down the crazy professor route for a moment, what kind of innovations, might be in the pipeline for us in years down the road? If you want to fantasize for a little bit to get some ideas, is there something that comes to your mind?
Yeah, this is something that we're just having some early conversations about. But I'm going to skip way ahead, right? Like there are all sorts of things that right in front of us. There's verifiable micropayments, there's verifiable queries, there's verifiable indexing. A lot of that stuff is going to get rid of, let's say, the arbitration process. It'll solve a lot of these issues. It'll let us be positioned to, deliver or play a role for EIP 4.4s. So let's go way ahead of that. I'll assume all of that's already solved. One thing we've been chatting about, and this is a lot of this actually being driven by Jackson, is we're curious about how zero knowledge proofs and AI can be combined, and actually I saw Ariel post something related to this on Twitter yesterday. It was using ZKP to, I haven't read the paper yet, but it was combining ZKP with convolutional neural nets. And you can imagine, we're imagining a future where you may have neural networks, let's say, kind of running maybe in you all probably remember the blockchain within a subgraph tweet thread that got a lot of excitement last year, where we're imagining these sorts of complex verifiable programs running in as subgraphs, and we can basically we may be able to have a future where we have all sorts of autonomous decision making happening in a verifiable way, and and potentially all being run on top of the graph. So that's my kind of wild professor speculation.
Awesome.
Thanks for the question, Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah, personally, I think this property of computational verifiability is like the golden, is the what's the word? The holy grail in many respects, and bringing that to more general purpose computations is an incredible development.
Yeah, I feel like zero knowledge proofs. If I've tweeted something similar to this, but if you're mathematically inclined and you know how to program, if you're interested in both, I view zero knowledge proofs as the probably it may be the most economically significant and have the biggest economic opportunity of any mathematical technique in our lifetime.
I can fully see that being true. And the implications of zero-knowledge proofs and cryptography more broadly outside of blockchains, even though blockchains are, an ideal substrate for that kind of thing, the scope of impact is just so massive.
Yeah, I like how you put it, as blockchain being the ideal substrate for that. I agree with you.
Cool. Okay, getting back on track. So could you tell us about some of the most exciting things that Semiotic will be working on in the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah. Right now, we have two main threads of effort. We have work related to RL and AI, and work related to zero knowledge proofs. In the RL and AI thread, we've been working for the past 6 months on what we call query cost prediction. So basically what we've been doing is we've been experimenting with neural networks, specifically neural networks that are commonly used for natural language processing, that can take as input a query, a GraphQL query, and then as output, the goal has been to predict the resource cost on the indexer system. When we initially started doing this, we were focused only on latency, but then we came to the opinion that it would be better to focus more on other metrics that were impacting the indexers, the graph node, the indexer software. And so now what we've transitioned to is that Alexei has been driving this. We've been instrumenting Postgres so that we can measure the predicted resource costs on the indexer's system given a query. And so the long-term goal for this, or the goal for this year, is to still arrive at these neural networks that you can take as input and achieve these resource costs predictions. And I'm going to circle back to this topic. So what I want to answer, what is this useful for? Why do we want these resource predictions? Well, as we know, currently with Agora, everybody is using pretty much a default Agora file. So people are just, most of the indexers are not changing the prices. They're not making custom prices for each subgraph. They're just picking a flat rate. And, that's okay, probably in terms of from an economic perspective right now, from the economic perspective of indexers, because the query traffic is still pretty low. But over time, what's going to happen as we continue the migration, we're going to see that it is going to be beneficial for an indexer to write custom prices for their queries. Now, I don't know if this is already obvious to everybody on this call, but even today, given a subgraph, there are some queries that you could send to the subgraph that will basically crash your system. Could basically use up all of your memory. And some of these big, that sort of big problem has actually been fixed. But prior to the fix, there were basically DOS queries that were available that could be found that would take up all your memory. And of course, on the other end of the spectrum, there are queries that cost your system almost nothing. And there's anything in between. Okay, so going back to these cost predictions that we're working on, we know, everybody on this call that's looked at Agora knows that if you were to write Agora by hand, it's going to take you a lot of time. And your time is probably better spent in other areas of your operation than setting all of these costs. I mean, this is our stance, and this is the reality that this is what we would like to make a reality for everybody on the call. And how are we going to do that? Well, in the short term, we have realized that this instrumentation of Postgres could be useful very soon. And how is that? Well, what you could do, you could imagine a situation where you've been serving queries, and then maybe you just start by fixing a flat price for a particular subgraph that you've indexed. And what you could do is you could collect the most common queries that you're receiving against that subgraph. And then what you do is you take that common set of queries that you're receiving, you run them through the custom profiler, and our custom profiler would then automatically output Agora files that would match the common query and the hardware costs that you would see based on that query. And then that would result in basically you could use that to arrive at automatic pricing for your subgraph. In the long term, what we would do is we're going to continue to work on the cost prediction models. And what this would do is it would catch after, if it's an uncommon query that you haven't seen before, this uncommon query would then go through the neural network. And the neural network would predict what the resource cost is going to be. And so this would happen at the Agora level. So this would be a way basically to catch the uncommon queries. This would be a way for you to price and catch the uncommon queries. And then ultimately initially the goal may be for like kind of these DOS type queries, but ultimately it'll be a fine grain prediction on your resource costs that you could then basically run a more efficient operation with.
That is fantastic. As you said, we've definitely seen very little investment from indexers into Agora cost models in the network today. So as much as that might make sense economically speaking, I think any work we can do to remove man hours out of operating an indexer and replace that with more efficient autonomous systems is absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing that and for explaining it so well.
You're welcome.
So I see we are almost at the top of the hour, and I wish we had more time to chat. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I guess to top it off, I'll leave you with the following question. So outside of the data challenges that the graph is broadly tackling, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see Web3 needing to overcome in the next couple of years in order to meaningfully eat into Web2 market share?
I think it's going to come down to usability for our end users and tooling for ourselves. And I think probably many people on this call saw the Moxie Marlin Spike, ex-CEO Signal Twitter thread. If you haven't seen that, I recommend reading Moxie's post on his thoughts on Web3. Basically, his argument is that people want usability, and meaning consumers want usability. They care about how easy it is for things to use, and centralized services often offer better usability because they can basically control the organization, they can control their resources perhaps more quickly than decentralized services. And this goes back to, well, the conversations earlier on this call. And so I think at a high level from a Web3 perspective, we have to provide a better tool. We have to provide a better experience and better tools. And I think that this will happen over time. I think a big question mark in my mind is that I still have this impression that a highly aligned group like ourselves on this call should be we should be more nimble than a large organization. I mean, by default, a large organization, I'm sure you've heard this analogy, is like a battleship. I mean, a large organization can pick a direction and they can plow ahead, but they can't pivot quickly. We have the ability to pivot quickly. So I think our challenge is going to be like, okay, how do we all plow ahead in the same direction? And if we can figure out a way to tightly, get in line somehow and put all of our force in the same direction, then I don't see, and also at the same time, be nimble when we need to. If we can do that, and I don't know if we can, then we will definitely, there's no question in my mind that we'll be able to dominate in the Web3 space and take away Web2 market share.
What a great answer to end on, and fully agree with you there. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. I'm sure others have enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thanks, Chris. It was an honor.
Well, that ends Indexer Office Hours number 46. Thanks for joining, everyone. As a final note, if you'd like to learn more about semiotic AI and SAM, please listen to GRT IQ episode 43, where things are covered in a bit of depth that we didn't get to here. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.